Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and tonight I've got Mac.
Good evening.
Unfortunately, Gio won't be joining us today. That could be for a host of different reasons, but don't worry. On today's podcast, we'll be going over the action from match week 27 of the Premier League, and we'll also preview the upcoming Champions League games as well. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at @house_of_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. Let's start off with the big game of the weekend, Mac, the Manchester Derby, which we watched together this past weekend for the most part. You know, after the game, quote unquote, was done, we sort of took our eyes off of it, but ultimately City won 3-1 in a game where they really needed to continue winning. Of course, to sort of keep pressure on the title race, but ultimately they came with the goods, got the win against their fierce quote unquote rivals in Manchester. What were your overall takes for this result, Mac?
One, I think would start with City. I think that makes the most sense. Just be able to go with the fact that they continue kind of their trajectory and keep pace with their competitors through the title race that we'll talk about later on in the podcast. But for them, I feel like they did everything that they needed to do in this game. They were methodical. They were consistent. You knew how they were going to play. In regards to the amount of shots on target, total shots in a single game, I think that's the highest recorded in Premier League history. So in terms of what they were able to do offensively, the output was there. And even though Manchester United were in some areas of the pitch tough opposition, they're eventually able to break them down. I know the man of the match performance definitely goes to Phil Foden. He deserves a lot of the credit, kind of what happened. But I do want to individually just pinpoint, I feel like, one aspect of Man City and why they were so successful. And maybe, Ray, you may call me biased here, but I'm going to talk about my boy John Stones. And I want to be able to walk you through and follow this journey with me, because his positioning was a little bit different than they normally have done. Normally, when he's plays at a center half, he jumps alongside Rodri in a kind of two-man midfield to create a 3-2-5 in possession. Instead, what he did, he took it even a step further, where he was actually ahead of Rodri and played very much in the pocket of between Bruno Fernandes, Kobe Mainu, Casemiro, and McTominay. And he really, because of his positioning and kind of filling up space in that midfield, it allowed a lot of other space for additional runs to be made, which if you notice and take a look back at Phil Foden's first goal, especially, that was what's highlighted it, is the ball comes from Rodri to Phil Foden. But why is that space in that where Foden is able to cut in wide open? It's because John Stones is occupying the other midfield area, and all four of them don't know who's the correct player to cover. So it's just like a tactical evolution from Pep, using John Stone as kind of his I would say his skeleton key in a lot of ways. Where like, oh, I have this problem. Let me be able to utilize Stones to be able to fix it. Was able to do it, created space, got them back in the game. And of course, we're just ever relentless in the pressure on Manchester United and ended up going ahead and winning the game. So overall, great performance, great offensive performance, did what they needed to do. Again, tactical tweet from Pep. So great reaction from City with their competitors performing well as well.
So I, of course, want to jump on that. John Stones, we know how he's been deployed with City, and that's great. And we saw that because let's go back quickly. Of course, we got to mention Man U did jump on and score early, which I guess we can all kind of say was against what was expected from this game. But ultimately, after that, it was just City relentlessly not letting Man U have an outlet. And not get out of their half comfortably. And I think John Stones is a big part of that, because essentially now you have two holding midfielders occupying those spaces and really preventing any outlets. By the way, if it goes very long, you have your sweeper keeper in Ederson, who's always going to be there. And then if they do have a knockdown, you have Rodri and Stones just eating up that space. So great shout there. And you can see it, 27% possession for Man U overall. And like you called it out, same number of shots that Man City had. So that's, I think, a testament to how the game went. But I guess let's quickly talk about Man U. They, of course, got that early goal, which Rashford, great strike. But apart from that, with Kyle Walker playing as a right back in that game, Marcus Rashford, I think, was the quote-unquote striker, but it really looked like he was operating more on the left. And if you have Kyle Walker essentially matching him for pace, he will have to essentially get a either have a clear one-on-one chance where he goes past him with skill, or he gets lucky and Kyle Walker makes a mistake. And ultimately, that really negated itself. And I think we even saw him come off in the game where I think Ten Hag was just saying, unfortunately, it wasn't working out for him, which kind of begs the question. I don't think it would have changed too much, but maybe would Højlund have changed this type of scenario for Man United, given the fact that then you would essentially be occupying more than one of those three at the back for Manchester City. And the game plan, as we all know, and was really the only way, and pretty much at all times is the only way you're going to get something against City, is hope you get a goal in the counter and you get in behind. So that's something interesting that I thought, but ultimately it wasn't United's day. I'm not sure how you felt about sort of the selection from Ten Hag in this game. Ultimately, a lot of changes forced on his hand, but yeah, just a thought about that, because now it looks like, unfortunately for Man U, and we'll touch on it a little later, it looks like this loss was huge, and it ultimately leaves them out of their top four race, I would say. But what are your thoughts on Man U of this game, Mac?
I definitely agree with that. It probably leaves them out the top four, but it's tough because I feel like they are getting ripped to shreds for this performance, and which I think is extreme. It should not be. This is what's expected against this Man City team. The reason why it can be viewed upon this with this type of lens is because of the recent loss against Fulham, right? If they won against Fulham and lost in this game, I think that's what's expected, right? It's the performance against the rest that they're struggling with, on top of struggling against kind of their main competitors. So it's struggles across the board for Manchester United, and that's what's compounding the issue. So I feel like they're getting a little bit too harshly done in for this performance, because realistically, their game plan makes sense of how we want to be able to get past City, how we want to be able to attack them. And even out of possession, where Rashford was playing on the left, it makes sense to me, because Højlund, I think, could have made a difference, because what are your best bets when you're not able to play through City? You play over them, and it's either the first sequence of play is you do get behind them, but then of course you have Kyle Walker there, or their second sequence of plays, right after City lose possession. It's very much like in basketball, to use the comparison, is there's so many cross matches where you'll see a center guarding a small forward, but then when they switch to the other side of the court, those matchups aren't the same, and everyone has to switch their guy. They get lost in the confusion. They don't know who to cover. That happens a lot for City, because they're one of the few teams where they're so intricate, they're so complex, where a lot of players are like, okay, I have to fill certain roles. Where, for example, in that goal, Rashford has so much space outside the 18 because the back four completely drop off, but Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva are not back in possession yet because they were so far out of position in defensive aspect in the transition play. So for me, it made sense. I liked the game plan. It was the only way Manchester United were going to get anything out of the game. So did not have a problem with this performance whatsoever. It's just that there were other areas for different games that they've had these issues. I do want to call out one individual player there. Maybe I'm being harsh, but okay, the 1-1 result would have been fine. But I think how they lost the game is because they weren't able to rotate out Casemiro. Because for me, even though Amrabat is getting blamed a lot for the last goal, which is fair, should have done with it, that pass from Casemiro was at his chest when they're 10 yards apart from each other, and he's the one that got cooked by Foden and got run by for the second goal. So if you had a little bit more depth, maybe his legs are gone. That's something that needs to be looked at, absolutely, because I don't and maybe that's not Ten Hag's fault. Maybe you shouldn't even rip Casemiro too much, but it should not be expected of him to run ragged against this Man City team for a full 90 minutes. That's too much of asking him in this position. And unfortunately for Manchester United fans, it didn't last out, because I felt like if he didn't make those mistakes, they come out with the one result. That's a huge win for United, and it definitely comes to a lot of credit. But unfortunately, from those errors, they kind of shot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, no, that's a great shout. Amrabat, of course, a lot of people will question his decision in the third goal, but ultimately, Foden was the one that, like you said, you called him out as the man of the match, and really, I guess I'll have to do my apology here because I called him out previously in I think their game against Chelsea where he of course had been on a decent run of games, scoring back to back and really contributing to this the City run. It went a little bit quiet for him in that game, and then of course now he's back at it, and what a big way to do it. Him, as of course we saw before the first half ended, Holland missed a huge chance. Man, you went into the half 1-0 up, and we thought, you know what, this could be great. Even if they concede one, it's still a tie, like you said, it would be a great result. But Foden came, took it with his own right, and really just created his first goal, which was fantastic strike. Not much the keeper can do there. Who actually Onana played quite well, I think. I would want to mention, but of course scores a second goal as well. A nice one too. That really takes a couple of defenders out of the way and slots it home. And then ultimately Haaland gets his goal. But I mean, Foden and his impact in this game really shows us that he's kind of pretty much stepped up now, and this can be considered, of course, definitely a starter, but even amongst rubbing shoulders with your Kevin De Bruyne and your Bernardo Silva's in the City team. So that's a great shout for him. Anything really stand out apart from this result, Mac, for you?
No, I think we nailed in the all the key aspects that I think that should or have to be covered. Other than the last part is that I feel like Holland's getting away with it a little bit because that miss at the end of the first half, I feel like is going to be overlooked because they won, but this is not, as well as the third goal was gifted to him in a lot of ways. Where is this a drop of form just temporarily? Because it's not just been a week or two; it's been several months now. I understand he's just scored five goals in a cup competition against whomever they played. I have no idea; it doesn't matter. But the point being is that in the Premier League games, he did get, I would say, maybe some detractors, or if you want to look at critically at Haaland last season, did he score in any big game? In the Cup final, no. Champions League final, no. Didn't play well in any of those games. In the big games, is he stepping up? I'm not asking that question. I fully believe that he will. I want to make that abundantly clear. I will not be the voice in the wind that says Haaland is not going to play well against big teams. I'm not going to do that. But I do think it's not unfair for other people to ask that question. And I feel like that is being a little overlooked because they won. If this was a tie, I think that would have been the starting point. That would have been the conversation maker right there.
For sure. But ultimately, it was a win, which keeps them a point behind Liverpool, of course, after they finished the game, because Liverpool got the win against Nottingham Forest very, very late in a game where we'll definitely get into it. But ultimately, both teams had some chances. I think overall, of course, Liverpool will dominate in terms of possessions and with more shots, but definitely with the changes to the squad and sort of the team sheets, definitely didn't look as fluid as before, and it really shows with real only chance coming from, I think it was Bobby Clark, who had a shot go over the bar in the first half, whereas of course Origi, former Liverpool player, and Anthony Elanga had chances to really put Forest up early in the first half. Chances were exchanged ultimately in the second half. Liverpool, I think, would feel like they should have scored a couple more, considering especially when Darwin Núñez came on early, he had a couple himself. But I think Nottingham Forest definitely would have settled for the draw, and at that point, were, I think, kind of just hoping something fell for them on the opposite end, but I think they would have been okay with the draw. I guess we'll definitely get into the discussion about the goal there, but what were your initial reactions from this game, Mac?
I think the first thing to talk about, and I know we're going to skip to it, is the controversy of the game. I think that's the biggest takeaway. I think that's the biggest highlight that we need to be able to review, because it's had multiple aspects, and I do have a strong opinion on it. In regards towards the end of the game where Liverpool ended up scoring, I think just previously beforehand, which you had highlighted out, is that Konate and Gallagher, they collide, and what ended up happening is the ref blows the whistle. At that time, Nottingham Forest have the ball. Then what ends up happening is Liverpool are given the drop ball and resume possession and go on to score. At the end of the day, what the impact and how this happened, Paul Tierney, reports have come out where next weekend he's not going to be refereeing a Premier League game. He's a very experienced ref. He's got pushed down to VAR covering the Arsenal game versus Brentford, actually. So that's them recognizing, yeah, he made a big mistake. It was a large blunder. but it happens. This is the exact same Liverpool team at the beginning of the season, if you do not recall, had the offside issue called against them. It's a tough position because even though VAR in a lot of situations was brought in to take out the errors, but then other people complained that it kind of destroyed people's like the flow or the personality, or mistakes are part of the game. The human error is part of the game. They're still in it. That's still in it. Technology doesn't escape to kind of negate humanity. There are still those mistakes going to happen, right? So this was just another case. It all ends up eking out where Liverpool will be like, hey, we won here, we lost there. It kind of almost comes out in a wash in some ways. So even though a lot of people are like, oh, they're so lucky, they're this, they're that, it comes out in a wash given at the end of the day. And I think that if we were to ask a neutral watching this game, which team would deserve to win, or if they play this game 10 times, win a majority of the time, it would have been Liverpool. So I'm not whatsoever displeased by the result after the whole performance, but that I know I'm kind of jumped the gun and went all the way to the end. So I guess I want to give a chance. What are your thoughts on that? And then maybe we'll come back and I'll give my thoughts about the other aspects of the game or what Liverpool may have going on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of course, a different looking side for Liverpool, and I think, of course, if you have your Salah, Nunez, and Diaz, I think that's without a question Klopp's front three on if everyone's healthy. I feel like actually now there's a little bit of a fluidity in that sense where even though Salah is the main man, we've seen multiple chances and multiple times in the season where Salah has a chance and he sees Nunez down on the other wing. He's not seeing Sadio Mane, so he'll actually pass the ball. Whereas Gakpo coming on, and you can make the case of maybe Jota, though I don't see it as much, and maybe other younger strikers. If they get a chance, this is their only chance. So they might not be looking to make that extra pass and be unselfish. And that's, of course, highlighted with the Cody Gakpo chance in the second half where Nunez picks up the ball. They're on a break. He finds Gakpo, but, of course, makes the darting run straight down the middle. Gakpo takes the shot himself, which, I mean, if I'm in his position, I'm trying to score as well. This might be my chance to sort of really cement myself as part of the starting 11, now that, of course, there are injuries to this team. But, of course, the wrong decision doesn't end up scoring, and if he actually scores that, there's every chance that Nunez doesn't hit the target either, but at least I think we can all agree that's the right decision to make. And those kind of things, having to rely on the players coming through who are not sort of in that, have not been in those positions, it's the tough part. And ultimately, as a Liverpool fan, I'm very, very, of course, happy that the win came through because the only thing that we really ask at this point is just to try to keep winning until the reinforcements come back. So, of course, I'm quite pleased with the result, but of course, it's not as fluid and not as pleasing to the heart to watch because these games come down to those fine margins. But yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts?
I completely agree with you. Is that there isn't the same. Again, most of these teams, they don't have the depth to sustain the amount of injuries that Liverpool had. The fact that they're still hanging on is credit to them. By hell or high water, they're still at top of the table. They have 4 wins in the balance, even though a lot of their best players, especially their attacking best players, have been hurt. So you have to give them their flowers. You have to be able to give them the credit on that end. But I do think the buck stops now because what's going to happen next game? They're facing City. And not just that, Arsenal are actually playing first. And we'll go on and talk about Arsenal a bit, but they had won their game. And in all likelihood, if they win a game away at Brentford, they'll start the day as top of the table. So both of these teams, City and Liverpool, are going to know, hey, if we want to be able to take the lead, because either of those teams, if they pick up a full 3 points, they themselves go top of the table. So the pressure is on, I feel like, as soon if, knock on wood, Arsenal pick up the win. So I think, as I said, the buck stops now for them where, okay, they've got the rub of the fortune. They got the rub of the luck. They can't really rely on that anymore. So either one or two things happen. Those players have to come back and immediately perform, which is a tough ask. Salah is reported to be able to come back for that game. It's a tough ask to be able to come in and walk in and be able to do that day one. Or these players here need to step up and fulfill those roles. That's what needed of them. And right now, if you're asking me, if you're starting a midfield three of Clark, Gomez, and McAllister, it's a rough look against City. So they need to definitely kind of either accelerate the youth program there. I understand they've rotated some players. I don't think that they have a Europa League commitment midweek this week. Do they? Or do they actually on Thursday?
Yes.
Yeah.
They do
So
have a game this weekend.
so
Sorry,
I
this week.
expect heavy rotations of that game
Yep.
because they need everyone ready to go. Even though there's already rotations this game where Szoboszlai you saw on the bench, Nunes you saw on the bench, Endo you saw on the bench. I don't think if it was City, they were playing City this weekend, that would have been the case. So again, they need to turn things around now because, like I said, the luck will run out eventually.
Yeah, for sure, and yeah, I'm very looking forward to that game, which we'll touch on, of course, in our preview. I guess I didn't really get to say my piece, and I do feel like if I'm a Nottingham Forest fan, I would feel outraged by that call. And of course, scenes we don't want to see are, of course, it's been reported that the owner of the club was actually looking for the referee after the game and then wanted to, I don't, I'm not gonna assume, but of course wanted to at least share some of his thoughts there, and not something I want to see. My only thing about that goal is Nottingham Forest had a couple of chances to get that away. You can't be dribbling the ball out, especially in that situation. So of course it is. I feel like they should feel hard done by that decision, but also they haven't helped themselves throughout the whole season with some of those decision-making incidents. So we'll see what happens there. We'll take a quick break here, Mac, and then we'll be back covering some more Premier League football, and also we'll talk Champions League as well. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We are going to continue now discussing some more Match Week 27 action, and actually game that took place on the day of recording. Arsenal was away at Sheffield United and just destroyed them. Arsenal winning 6-0 on the day, following up their strong display against Newcastle at home by really just continuing the misery for Sheffield United, who find themselves last in the Premier League, and I just had it here, a negative 50 goal difference, conceding already 72 goals in the Premier League. So it looks like it's wraps for them. Of course, it's been kind of this way since the start of the season, but nothing to take away from Arsenal, who were inside 15 minutes 3-0 up. So Mac, let me toss it to you. What are your initial thoughts from this result?
It goes with the form of Arsenal since they came back from their Saudi Arabia trip. Since the new year, they've kind of continued that trend. I think this now is 3 games in a row away from home where they have scored 5 or more goals and won all games. So it's just, and that's the first ever in the Premier League having that consecutive wins with that amount of goals scored. So they're on the run of form, and what you can at their best expect, where defensively they're arguably the best in the Premier League, defensively goal difference, goal wise, as well as offensively, they're able to create abundance of chances. The difference has been where now, in comparison to the beginning of the years, they're bagging those goals away. They're putting to bed the questions about, oh, they need the Ivan Toney, they need the number 9. No, if they can do it enough through a collective, if those individual players are going to take their opportunities consistently, which they've done thus far since the turn of the calendar. So overall, in this fixture, absolutely phenomenal. From minute 1, when Saka hit the crossbar, the game felt over and done because it didn't feel like Sheffield United had any opportunity to get out. There was no way that they can string a couple passes together and at the same time, Arsenal cutting through them like a hot knife through butter. It really was tough. I think it's a little bit, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but just even how Sheffield United lined up with the back 4 wasn't enough, because that too many times you're going to have Saka or Martinelli in one-on-one positions out wide against your fullbacks and then not enough coverage centrally. So from the set, even just how the game played to the lineups, there was nothing that went right for Sheffield, and there's everything that went right for Arsenal. So it's great on that end. It puts them well in above the lead in terms of goal difference, where I think now they're 6 up on Liverpool, I think, on goal difference wise, and even a couple more on Manchester City, which, as we know through the last couple of 6-7 seasons, where those are the standards where they're not just wins, they're picking up wins by large goals amounts. And now Arsenal has matched that and surpassed that tally. That's the next foot in the door. And they got to keep that going as the matchup coming up for Liverpool and Man City. Arsenal need to keep this trajectory. So overall, there's no negatives really. I think other than Martinelli looked to have come off injured, which hopefully is not a serious knock going into the Champions League. But again, great performance, very good play. And lastly, sorry, before I toss it back to you, Ray, 6 different goal scorers. So again, they're able to do what I talked about, where if it's not relying on just on one person, spread the goals. And even Saka doesn't even need to score, who had scored in 5 consecutive games previously. So it's a great overall team performance.
So actually, on that note, six different goal scorers, and of the six, five of them were one-touch finishes, and it may not seem that great, but one-touch finishes in most of them inside the box. I think maybe all of them probably inside the box. Goes to show how well and how fluid the Arsenal attack has been, which you of course highlighted already. Set a couple games, away games where they scored 5 goals, and just a testament to how well Arsenal are playing at the moment. Where even the Martinelli goal deflection, yes, could say that it was the deflection really helped the goal, but you're in that position, you're putting yourself and you're putting yourself in those positions, and you're getting those chances through that type of play. And so great, of course, great to see from Arsenal fans. Kai Havertz getting a goal, of course. He took a couple more touches, but very, very good to see him be clinical in those positions, especially after Martinelli was thrown to the ground by the defender right before that, which was just something funny that caught my eye. But ultimately, as well, like you said, Saka, they were able to take him off because Arsenal were 5-0 up at half, and then even had Gabriel Jesus and Thomas Partey come by in the second half, and of course the boy Cedric, who we kind of know him as, we call him the Thanasis of Arsenal, where if he's coming on, it's a wrap for the game. Maybe you can have a thought about that, but of course. Just before I finish, I just want to say best goal difference right now in the league. Like you said, most goals for, and actually most fewest goals against. So great job for Arsenal so far this season, and that really, with like I said, Liverpool City potentially taking points off each other. That's going to be great to see it come down to those fine margins. But Matt, go ahead.
Just to kind of further implement and carry on what you're saying about the different goal scorers, is where now Arsenal have 5 different players directly involved in 10 or more goals this season. That's Saka, Odegaard, Martinelli, Rice, and now Havertz all have combined goals and assists more than 10, which is the most in the Premier League. And even in possession-wise, how dominant they were. You saw William Saliba with 169 passes, which is the third most, I think, recorded for a defender. The only other 2 higher were Manchester City defenders, and was, in fact, more than the entire Sheffield United team combined. So just how controlling and dominant they were on the pitch. It really kind of not just demonstrated in the scoreline, but all the underlying stats of how they were to spread around. It's just that they have to continue this trajectory. There is no breathing room in this title race for them. Because if they even fall off a little bit, you can see how, especially with Arsenal previously, where it can fall off. And even though we're moving outside the Premier League a little bit, and it kind of was displayed in, if you may have seen, Granit Xhaka, when he came out and made some comments recently where Leverkusen, their team, is talking about, I was in this position last year with my team at Arsenal, and we kind of let it slip. So even though we have this lead now, we need to keep the mentality. And he's passing that along to his teammates now, but Arsenal need to understand and keep that trajectory where they don't have any room for error whatsoever, even more so than last year, and they have more competition. So it's a rougher ride, but they need to continue at this pace for the rest of the year.
Yeah, of course, and as well, added on that, the experience from last year can't be left unsaid. You had a big majority of this squad going through that together. It can only build them to sort of learn from that experience. So we'll see what goes down there. Very interesting for our next preview podcast. But let's move on then to discuss the race for the top 4 position. We briefly discussed Man United, who looks like it's going to be a very, very tall mountain to climb if they are to finish in that top 4 position, because Aston Villa went away to Luton. Didn't make it easy for themselves, Mac. Ultimately won 3-2, but came away with the win. And again, have been a little bit iffy there, but now 3 wins in a row. What can we really say? 55 points, 5 points above Spurs, who have a game in hand, and actually they do face each other in the next game week, so that's going to be a tight one. But what were your overall reactions to Aston Villa Luton, Mac?
It was very surprising in a lot of ways, where at the beginning of the game, we were watching this actually live as well, where Aston Villa seemed comfortable. Aston Villa seemed fine. They seemed settled, where they felt very comfortable, but they seemed to have a weakness, and it's in something that I've called on previously before, where it seems like their system is being a little bit found out, where you saw consistently this exact same set piece, the exact same play done by Luton being exposed continuously against this Aston Villa team. So even though, yes, you won, this is great, phenomenal, Watkins got on the score sheet, looks like you play well offensively, it seems like as we get further along into games, further along to the season, they're getting found out. And I'm very worried about them in this matchup going into Spurs. We'll talk about that separately when we will definitely preview that game for sure. I think that, again, we'll have the Man City Liverpool number 1, but this will definitely be the second game we review no matter what. But I'm very worried going into that game because all those areas in and behind them, it's too much to ask for from Martinez, from their back lines to be able to handle that and that amount of space. They need to do a better job and make an adjustment and have something taken care of. Because if you're struggling this much against a Luton team, yes, you're done. The game was dusted. Maybe you let off a little, great. But this is not the first time with this team. I'm very worried about the longevity, further opportunity. They do have a lead on Tottenham right now, but if they slip up at all, and very well could happen next, they're in a tough position. So again, for me, I'm very worried about them. Again, great result, but I think that I would not be surprised if in 2 weeks we see the table 4-5 split switched over.
Ooh, big shout, big shout. Of course, I pretty much everything you said, you covered there is what I would have said. I'm going to flip it over to Luton Town, and I'm just so heartbroken for them. They've had this season already. Liverpool snatching 2 points away from them, getting a draw there. Arsenal winning very, very late. Man U in a game where it looked Luton were the better team. Ultimately, they weren't able to sort of come out with all 3 points there. And this game here where they pushed Aston Villa to the end, ultimately undone by Digne header, I think right before 90 minutes, is just so heartbreaking for them because, of course, they come up, not a lot expected from them, and those fans, again, just wish the best for them, that they're able to see their team have those moments. And like you said, that chance where Morris, having scored, gets that at the game tied 2-2, could have put it away again, and that would have been fantastic for the fans, ultimately undone there. So I'm excited to see what Luton Town can produce at home. I'm just afraid what will happen when they do go away to your other Premier League clubs. And so for their sake, I hope that they're able to pick some more points up at home and have those thrilling games go their way as it goes into the season. But ultimately, not much you can really do there. Aston Villa showing, I guess, at the end that they ultimately were the better team with sort of the chances that they're able to take in those critical moments. And so creating that 5-point gap between themselves and Spurs, who actually won against Crystal Palace that same day, it's going to be interesting because Spurs also started this game back losing. Well, it was goalless at half, but they did concede first from a fantastic free kick by Eze, 58 minutes in, and then had a host of chances come their way. Ultimately, I would say were quite lucky because a mistake by Anderson led Brennan Johnson to square that ball across to none other than our boy Timo Werner, who tied the game up, and then goals from Romero and Son really helped put Spurs over Crystal Palace. What were your reactions to that match, Mac?
Again, for Spurs, it feels like in some ways, not to say that they're inevitable, but they're close enough to that where you always know that they're going to create opportunities. You always know with their play style, their flair, their aggressiveness, they're willing to express themselves, that they're going to put themselves in the position to score, but they're also going to leave themselves quite unfortunately in position to be very vulnerable, where I would argue Spurs over the course of the first half, even at that point, should have been up. Timo Werner missed a breakaway. Is anyone really surprised? Probably not. But overall, if you look at collective of their game that they're playing, I like the style. I like what they're trying to do. It's just that, unfortunately, with the aggressive nature that you play, sometime you're going to roll dice and get snake eyes. And given that they do have, I would argue, a talent disparity between them and some of the other teams around above them in the table, it's bound to happen. So again, I want to be able to give credit there. But for me, I'm very worried about the other side of the pitch for Crystal Palace because it's something I want to touch on with Luton Town as well. They actually play each other next. And I think that's going to be a fascinating matchup between the two of them, because I think we're going to learn a lot about both those teams. Crystal Palace with the new manager, Luton Town trying to stay in the Premier League, because Luton Town themselves, their next 3 matches are against, as I said, Palace, Bournemouth, and Nottingham Forest. If they don't pick up 6 points over the course of those games, something of that ilk, they're done and dusted as well. Versus if they pick up the win against Crystal Palace, then they're back in the conversation. They've knocked off some of their competitors. So it's worrying for Crystal Palace, where aside from the free kick, realistically, against a team like Spurs, who, based off their system and how expressive they are, they're gifting you chances in a lot of areas that they weren't create enough. They didn't do enough to create enough of a presence other than really that free kick, in my opinion. So that for me leaves me a little bit worried. Again, new management, we'll see what happens. But the tough part is you have this one game. Yeah, you're probably not likely going to lose, which is what they did against Spurs. But you have to win this next one. It is a must win for both of these teams. So it's going to be a tough look for, again, from my viewpoint, for Luton, as I said, and Palace. And like I said, I still do have a lot of faith in Spurs of what they're able to do, because maybe this is a little bit selfishly, and I know most people will be like, "Oh, Andrew, you get pegged as an Arsenal fan. What are you doing?" Spurs play. It's fun. I want to see that. Who doesn't want to watch their willingness to kind of eat their own foot in a way, of make their own mistakes. It's enjoyable to watch. So overall, I want to see them do well, and I think going against their matchup against Aston Villa, like I said, I think is similar to Palace and Luton, is going to be vital.
Yeah, great shot there. Really interested to see what happens in that match. Of course, 2 teams that really need a lot going their way, especially towards this part of the season. So we'll keep an eye out for that. Now let's shift our attention back to some Champions League games. Now, I'm going to come out and say it. Likely 2 games that are wraps, or 2 ties that are wraps, are Real Sociedad are home to PSG, and Man City are home to Copenhagen. I'm going to go on a limb here and say, Mac, that these 2 games we're probably not going to cover as much. Unless you have something there, you can stop me at any time now. But I think the main games that we're trying to cover are Bayern, who are hosting Lazio and are down 1-0 on aggregate, and Real Madrid and RB Leipzig, who Real Madrid are winning and are at home, but are susceptible as well to sort of losing leads, especially in games where it's kind of expected for him to have it all wrapped up. But Mac, I'll toss it to you. Pick any of these 4 games that I just mentioned, likely those 2 latter games I'd mentioned, and give me something that you'll be watching or keeping an eye out for this week.
So, I told you before this podcast is I have a hot take.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Actually, I can't hear your audio coming through. I'm not sure if something happened there, but I'll let you take your time there. In the meantime, maybe I'll go on a limb and say I'm not necessarily liking Bayern's chances to go through. I can hear you now, Matt, but yeah, Bayern, they tied against Freiburg this week. We saw them, of course, win toward. So they actually conceded the first goal, came back and scored 2 goals themselves against Freiburg away, and looked like they had it in the bag, and then ultimately conceded a goal in the 87th minute to drag themselves down 10 points away from Leverkusen, who are in top spot there. Having that in the back of their mind, I think that's going to be something that, with the way that they're sort of struggling to beat deep blocks, it might translate into this game, who I think Lazio, if they are smart about it, and I know that everyone will expect this, they'll probably play a deep block and try to hit Bayern on the break. But Mac, what are your predictions for this game, I guess? Ooh, that's a big shout because of course they'll be keeping an eye out on that what's happening with Leverkusen, and if there's any way possible they can at least win something this season, they might just pull the trigger there. But yeah, I'm surprised. I'll be interested to see what happens, and also I'm interested to see what happens if Matthias Tal, who was one of the goal scorers for Bayern Munich this in this game against Freiburg, if he even starts or gets into the game very early on in the game as well, because they'll of course need a goal. So keep an eye on that, and we'll definitely cover that in our next podcast. So guys, this concludes our podcast for today. If you guys like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social media, both on X and Instagram. Our handle is at @house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well, houseoffooty@hotmail.com. Next time you hear from us will be later this week when we review this week's Champions League games, and also we'll preview this weekend's match week 28 of the Premier League. But until then, Mac, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mac, and we'll see you guys soon. So.